Good evening. Welcome to the Spiritual But Not Religious Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. I, uh, I've got a great guest lined up tonight. But before I talk to you about tonight's guest, let me tell you about next week's guest. I have Deborah Kruger wrote a book called Let's Play Gratitude with Life's Sticky Issues. She it's a great little book. I think we'll have a really good time and learn some pretty powerful things with that show. My guest tonight is Gary Bello. She's been with yoga for the better part of 40 years. Been in an ashram, goes 3 months out of the year, or went 3 months out of the year to India to be in an ashram to learn from a Swami. He's actually a Swami himself. And he kind of bounces back and forth between Florida, where he does classes, and Canada, where he lives. So we'll look forward to talking with Gary here shortly. In the meantime, I want to tell you a bit about the Spiritual But Not Religious Show and the Spiritual Broadcasting Network and what we're doing, what we're about. You know, in the last, say, 15 years, 20 years maybe, there's been a growing number of people who see themselves as being spiritual but not religious. And although they have a solid belief in some kind of a higher power, they really aren't able to identify with any of the mainstream religious practices, Christianity or Judaism or any of the major religions. Actually, as I understand it right now, there's 1/5 of the U.S. population claims to be spiritual but not religious. So there's a huge number of us, and we really don't have a voice because we don't gather together. Most of us don't go to any kind of a mainstream church. And so the purpose of this show was to bring you the many diverse voices, because that's one of the great things about being spiritual but not religious is our diversity, and bringing you those voices. In the Spiritual Broadcasting Network, we'll be bringing you more shows in the similar vein to this show in the very near future. So that's what we're about, and hopefully you'll enjoy some of the guests that we have. We got some great guests lined up. We had a little problem, had a big major problem last week, and we weren't able to broadcast. We have Howard Falco, who wrote a book called I Am. Howard's a really good guy and a powerful, powerful book, so you want to be sure and tune in for that. We have a whole great agenda of guests coming here in the next 4 or 5 weeks, so be sure to come back next week and the following week. Okay, my guest tonight, Gary Goppel Bello. We got Gary on the line, Tom?
Yes, we do, George.
I don't know.
Gary, you still there? Ooh, wow.
Well, it looks like we might have lost Gary. We lost Gary?
Yeah, I'm gonna get him back.
All right. So while Tom's getting Gary back on the line, I want to talk with you a little bit about, gee, you know what's going on tonight? And it's probably the first one I've missed in a very long time, and that's the State of the Union. I'm sorry to be missing that. However, I've got it in the record mode so I can catch it after the show. An important thing. You know, one of the things that I believe, and that is that spirituality that takes me out of my day-to-day life and my day-to-day concerns really isn't doing its job, because the one common denominator from all religions that I see is their spirituality is intended to make us a better person, so that we're better in relationships one with the other, so that we're moving forward in a higher level. So if we can't bring that spirituality down here where our feet are planted, then I'm not sure how valid that spirituality is for us. So how we do, Tom? We got
I got him back. I'm gonna try to put him back on.
okay, great. Gary, we got you on the line.
I'm right here.
Well, I'll tell you what. A few minutes ago, your voice sounded like a real scream here on the online. I don't know what went on. Good,
Now, it's,
good to connect with you.
yeah, well, it's nice to know that my voice is back to normal again.
You're back to normal. You're sounding great. Hey, listen, I want to thank you for hooking us up with Jeffrey Armstrong. What a good guy. We just had a great conversation with Jeffrey.
Yeah,
How'd you guys?
Jeffrey's a high quality, very aware, scholarly, articulate. He's a wonderful guy. He's a loving person.
Yeah, absolutely. That all came very much through in our conversation. Listen, I before we get started with the show, I want you to know you are the very first person that I have ever talked with, had the pleasure of talking with, that ever even heard of Wilhelm Reich. And
My goodness, really, huh?
absolutely, and I've got a first edition of Rape of the Masses here, written, copyrighted 1940.
Yeah, right.
Orgone Energy. His is an amazing story. I don't think you could be thrown in prison for like he was in those days. Do you think? Or
Nowadays, no, not at all.
couldn't
As you
happen.
said many times, with 20% of the population defining themselves as spiritual, that's a big chunk of people, and things have changed since then.
Huge number. Things have changed a whole lot.
Yes.
So listen, you've got a book that you've had in process. Matter of fact, you have two books and a workbook in process. You're a pretty busy guy. Interesting title on the one, The Yogi and the Married Woman. I take it that's about you and your wife?
Yeah, actually, the name is the Swami and the Married Woman.
Oh,
so
right,
it's close,
right.
Yogi and Swami. Yeah, back in the 1970, when I first got involved with my spiritual journey, I had made a Swami Satchidananda, and I became a pre-monastic and a monk, and for 7 years I put myself wholeheartedly into the practices and the study of the Vedas and yoga.
I thought about putting the picture. I found a couple of pictures of you when you were at that stage. I thought about putting that up tonight, and then I thought, well, and there wasn't room to put one of each, so I put a little different picture up. But you were, what year was it that you were in India and doing this 7 years? What years were those?
Actually, it wasn't in India. I met my teacher in New York City back in 1970, and I went on to Montreal, and I started a yoga institute back in 1971 in Montreal, Canada. And so I traveled the United States and Canada sharing the teachings of yoga and teaching. So that was here in the West. My first trip to India wasn't till 1975.
So you were right in the middle of the flower power.
Oh yeah. Well, actually, I was
A little late.
someone who realized that the normal path that the way the world was offering me, what they were offering me, just wasn't doing it for me. I wanted more.
Right, and asked harder questions than most.
Well, I was asking those hard questions for many, many years, and until I met a yogi, Swami Satchidananda, no one really could answer that question. Of course, the biggest question was, who am I and why am I here?
Right, absolutely. I recall asking that when I was 9 or 10 years old, and the answer I got was basically to procreate, and I'm like, wow, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So.
Yeah, well, the answers I received, I was an altar boy back. I was a Catholic and grew up very religious and very much loving the ritual and chanting Latin. I was at a very early age just really infatuated with going deeper, and then so there's lots of us out there, and my journey fortunately continued on for the last 40 years.
Well, you practiced. I think you've practiced a couple of different versions of yoga, but you practiced Ashtanga yoga.
Yeah, now Ashtanga yoga is part of what's called Raja Yoga, and that's the part of yoga that asks the really big questions. The first one, just like you said, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? And how do I get there as soon as possible?
Does Hatha yoga ask those same questions?
Now, Hatha yoga, Ashtanga yoga is an 8-step or an 8-limb process. The third limb of Ashtanga yoga is asana. And the word asana, coming from Sanskrit, means a comfortable seat inside your body and your mind.
Oh, wow. That's the perfect place to be, because I think that's the prize, is it not?
That is. Well, actually, you know what? It's one of the steps that leads to the prize. Now, Hatha yoga is a subcategory of the third limb of Raja Yoga.
Ah, okay. Well,
So now, of course, what we see out in the world today is 16 to 20 million people practicing Hatha Yoga, which is more of the exercise, getting your body in shape and getting your nervous system strong, etc.
It kind of leaves the spiritual part lacking, from what I can see. The deeper.
Well, I think it's done purposely. They haven't studied it. It's not their path.
Right.
Hatha Yoga is a form of exercise when it's taught in that way.
Well, what's interesting to me when I look at this popularity of yoga, Gary, is I think back to Maharishi Mahet Yoga, that's when I first learned meditation, was back I don't know 65, 60, somewhere in there, 67. Late
you've
60s.
Been doing this a long time.
Yeah, well, like you, I've been doing it for a long time, and back then that whole concept, except for the Beatles, was that was of the devil, and anything from the East was verboten. It was bad news. It's come quite a ways since then, and I think that brand of meditation has helped to popularize it and bring this East meets West together.
I agree with you. And back in those days, Hatha Yoga was practiced so that we can calm our mind, make our bodies healthy, and with a clear mind, which is a big part of yoga, we were then able to serve and to help others. So a good deal of what yoga is about is making this a better planet to live on.
Well, you see we lost you on the phone. That's one of the things I was talking about, and that is that, spirituality that doesn't meet the road here as far as our humanity is concerned and make us realize that we're one and serve others and help one another, I think it would miss the mark completely.
I would agree with you 100%. For me, this is my own personal experience, but for 40 years, the way that I've studied yoga is that we are one family. Yoga comes from the Vedas.
Right.
And the Vedas have been around, over 10,000 years, and it is a library, a vast library that teaches us how to live in harmony with our Mother Nature, how to take our feminine and masculine nature and bring it together so it's harmonized and make it a better planet to live on.
Well, that whole idea right there about bringing the masculine and feminine nature together, I think that's one of the big jobs that we have as individuals. Not only the integration of the masculine and feminine, but the thinking and the mental and the emotional aspects of us, the light and dark side of us. That integration is a huge part of, at least it has been, about my spiritual journey.
Well, and you mentioned Wilhelm Reich. When I was a Swami, and I was a Swami for 7 years.
Right.
When I left the vows and still continued on, actually my teacher made me an interfaith minister so that I could continue with the weddings and the initiations and the teachings. But one of the things I did is I got into psychology, and I was fortunate enough to study with just a brilliant man. His name was Ron Kurtz, and I studied body-centered psychotherapy.
Uh-huh.
So after I got my master's degree in psychotherapy, I then went on and studied and did a practicum with Ron Kurtz. He was the gentleman who introduced me to Wilhelm Reich and the 6 different body types.
And the muscular armoring and all of that. It's pretty It's pretty amazing how right on that Reich was. Do you still practice any of that, or are you just pretty much...
Yes, I am a Hakomi therapist. I do body-centered psychotherapy as part of my practice. I've been a yoga teacher, a Hatha yoga teacher. I've taught, oddly enough, I had to count the number of classes for a certification.
Uh-huh.
So I've taught about 55,000 yoga classes.
Oh, just 55,000.
Just 55, and that's not counting the meditation and the other things. But a big part of my practice is equally, I love classes, but I also love working one-on-one, which is really the whole point of yoga. Yoga in the ancient times was not a class participation. It was a teacher sharing through their life. They would take a student, and through living their life with the student, they would share the teaching. So it was a one-on-one practice. And I still do that, so I'm working with individuals.
I do that one-on-one. I think that the way the true message has to come one-on-one through our experience. And I don't think a lot of this can be handed down from the pulpit and people actually get it and make it a part
Well,
of
it
their life.
doesn't work for me. I was
No.
fortunate enough to have a personal relationship with my teacher, and so I was able to spend time with him and learn from him, and I learned through seeing how things are done.
Right.
You can tell me to do something, but if I watch you do it, I learn a lot faster.
Oh, I think our best teaching comes by example. You know,
I totally agree with that, yes.
Even
Yeah.
from an attitude level. I remember, when I was young, my mother's favorite phrase was "Don't do as I do, do as I say." Well, you know how well that worked.
I only say that in my advanced yoga classes when I'm demonstrating a pose.
Right.
And I say, do as I say, not as I do.
Well,
Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Tom here, who you talk with, who produces the show, he does the Ashtanga yoga, and what's interesting to me, we know a guy who is like, gosh, he can get into some of the pretzel-like poses and teaches classes, and but he's totally missed the mark somewhere because he's heavy into drugs and just out there somewhere.
Well,
So,
something that I don't know if you're if you've read this, but being a yoga teacher for 40 years, I know this. Sometime in the early 1900s, one of the Rajas, the Maharajas in India, who had a very large school and was actually responsible for almost all of the yoga teacher training that was going on in India. And he had a very large school. So he went to the Olympics, and he fell in love with gymnastics. He hired two, and the gold medalists that year were two English men. He brought the two Englishmen back, hired them, and had these Englishmen teach gymnastics as part of his yoga teacher training. So what we have now, the lineages of yoga, specifically Bikram, the hot yoga,
right.
Ashtanga yoga, which, by the way, unfortunately, the word is now used to describe a strenuous form of hatha yoga, the physical yoga.
Yes.
Ashtanga means 8 limbs, and it describes the path of concentration and meditation. But it's interesting how they can change words and use it to mean something else.
Well, absolutely. Well, we get a good example of that of our politicians on a regular basis here.
Yeah. So a lot of the hatha yoga that's being taught right now is a power yoga. It's a type of yoga that's a fusion between ancient yoga techniques and gymnastics.
Well, that's interesting. So it's East meets West, and West is kind of winning out here, isn't it?
Well, it is in that it's become much more of a body-oriented practice. Now, there's nothing wrong with that because, nevertheless, it does help. However, I believe that the transformation we're looking for is in the mind, that until we train our mind to be a clear conduit for wisdom and intuition, until we allow the unifying effects of consciousness to manifest through the mind, that no matter how good your body is, if the mind's not pure, something's going to go wrong.
Something has to go wrong for you. Well, one of my teachers was Yogananda, who wrote autobiography.
Oh, yeah, Yogananda very well.
Very, very powerful in my life. It was one of those life-changing kinds of times for me. So, but I did yoga a bit, but I never really got into the physical part of yoga. You also teach the sutras from Patanjali?
That's correct. And that is, in fact, what Ashtanga yoga is.
That's really powerful. I studied that a bit. I didn't stay with it. I wish I had. That really takes, I think, a teacher, somebody who really knows that one-on-one, because I've read with that, and you really have to sit with that in order to comprehend what's being said.
Yeah, and I think that goes for almost all of the spiritual, in all the traditions, that unless you have someone who has dedicated their life to it and has been taught by teachers before them, and they learned from those teachers, they applied it to their life, and they're a living example of the teachings working. Now, they'll be the ones who can best guide you with these teachings, and you're absolutely correct. You cannot get this from a book, and you can't get it just from a group class. It very much needs a personalized, individual approach with this work.
So Gary, why do you teach yoga? I mean, why do you actually teach it? Because you could practice this and not teach yoga. Why do you teach it? Why do you teach yoga?
Well, yoga is the word that the word itself means to unite, to bring together.
Aha.
So the word yoga is a general term that means everything we do to create unity and to let all the parts of us work together. So when I first started yoga, that was back now when I was 20 years old. I'm 61 years old now.
Right.
My life was in shambles. And I was absolutely confused. I had just been court-martialed because I refused to take my platoon into battle. I had an awakening where I realized I couldn't kill anyone.
Good for
a bad
you.
time to get awakened, but that's when it happened, when I was a lieutenant in the Army. I went through a pretty rough time, so by the time I got out, and I was honorably discharged, by the time I got out of the Army, I couldn't get into law school, and I met a woman who was 67 years old. Her husband was 75. They had been doing yoga for 40 years, and when I met them, I was so enamored with them and so impressed with the integrity in their life that I asked them, what is it that you do? And now, they could have been doing anything, and I would have followed it, honestly.
Right. Just that impressive to you.
They were that impressive. They were that pure. They had been practicing yoga for 40 years.
Uh-huh.
So they introduced me to it, and as soon as I got involved, what I realized was it was an ancient practice. It's been around for thousands of years. It didn't have the dogma. It didn't demand that you believe anything.
Right.
It approached it in this way. You are an individual. Here are a set of practices that I have learned, that's what my teacher said, I've learned through practicing it that my mind has become calm, my body is healthy, and I have a tremendous love for life and for people on the planet. And here, try it out and see what happens.
So
I tried it out, and it worked.
So wow, when I think about what you just said about this couple, it's amazing. What year was this that you met them?
This was in 1971.
71, and they'd been practicing yoga for 40 years. They must have been a really interesting couple because that was
They
pretty
were
far
wonderful.
out at that point.
Yes.
I mean, that was really on. I mean, you go back from that to when they started. Must have been what, the 30s, 40s, something.
Yeah, it would have been. Yeah, probably. Let's see. That was 1971. So we're talking about back in the 30s.
That's amazing. That's because there was very little connection with the Eastern philosophies at that point that were especially not openly at that
No,
point.
not openly. I mean, you got it through the Theosophical Society, through the Rosicrucians.
Right.
Swami Vivekananda went to the World Council of Religions in 1880 in Chicago. So that was the first Swami bringing yoga and those ancient Vedic teachings to America. But there wasn't much going on in the 30s, for sure.
Well, theosophy was a big part of my teaching too. That as far as my path was concerned, it's kind of interesting to me how Krishnamurti, left and how all that kind of.
Yeah.
But Blavatsky was amazing to me.
Isn't it amazing how that this thread of consciousness has been down through the ages, that it has stayed alive, and that there are teachings that, no matter who it is that's teaching it, whether you will call it yoga, you call it a 12-step program, there's all different ways that it is showing up, but its purity has been there. We can live a life where our mind can be clear enough so that we can live in harmony with our planet, with each other, and cooperate. Learn how to live together. That's my main focus.
That and there's another part of that I think that's hugely important, at least in my life, and that is, the meditation has given me clarity, peace of mind, and also I've connected to in my solar plex area in my gut to this compass, if you will, this small voice that guides me and never ever leads me astray, where my mind can
Beautiful.
take me to some pretty pretty crazy places if I follow just that. And so my intuition has also increased dramatically because of the meditation practice. The clarity is really, really powerful.
Well, that is it. And then actually that brings us up to where we are right now, because you had mentioned the first book, which is The Swami and the Married Woman.
Right.
And that is our life. My wife and I, we've been married for 34 years. It's going to be 35. We've been together, the two of us, we met as yoga teachers.
She was teaching.
She was divorcing her first husband, and I was leaving the sannyas vows, thus the Swami and the Married Woman.
Aha, okay. So, I got it now. I didn't quite get the connection there.
Right, and so we both studied with the same teacher, so we met, and we've dedicated our whole life to sharing the teachings of yoga. We've worked in hospitals and drug programs. We've had meditation centers together. But in the study of psychology, along with these ancient practices, and when we're talking about Patanjali Sutras, and you are very, very accurate in saying you can't do that without a teacher, because the Patanjali Sutras are the psychological process of spirituality.
Right. Powerful.
You cannot be on a spiritual path unless you understand how the mind functions and you're able to deal with all the different experiences that are mental and emotional.
Huge factor in all of this. And if you miss that, I think that's what causes some of the religions that get so far out and get really weird is leaving that part out.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what my wife and I have done is we realize that there are so many people out there who will not really, especially the way yoga is being presented now, they're not going to be really interested in the physical parts of yoga. And when you say yoga now, you think hatha yoga, you think physical poses.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what we've done, because I work with people as a therapist, and worked with Reich, and this is something that your listeners will be interested in. You know this, I'm sure, that Wilhelm Reich studied with Freud. He was one of his two premier students, Carl Jung and Wilhelm Reich, being the two most famous.
Right.
But Freud and the Germans had studied the Vedas. The Vedas had come to Germany.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. And it influenced them very much. As a matter of fact, Germany is one of the only countries that didn't try to colonize India.
That's interesting.
Whereas the Dutch and all these other countries went into India and colonized them.
Right.
The Germans took the Vedas, and that's the kind of precision mind that the German has.
Well,
and they took the teachings of the Vedas, and they really got it. So, in fact, a good deal of Wilhelm Reich's work comes from the body types in the Ayurvedic system.
Well, I knew that Jung, was involved with that.
Yes, Jung a lot. Yes.
Yeah, and he, the Alcoholics Anonymous program, the 12-step program.
Yes.
Bill Wilson, the founder, attributed.
Yes.
Wanted to call him a co-founder because of his
yes, that's correct.
his
I
input.
remember that.
Pretty amazing stuff. The other thing about Jung, he was also he bought a codice, I think, from the Nag Hammadi find, the scrolls they found, and was actually a mystic. He wrote a mystic tract himself. The big problem for him was in order to stay with his psychological, being a psychiatrist, he really couldn't talk much in those days about these other things and be able to keep his integrity.
That's true, and also I don't think he really had a teacher that was guiding him deeply into those fields.
Yeah, I don't think he did either. Freud had been
because what happened was, in studying Reich, now there are 6 body types.
Uh-huh.
Now what that means is there are 6 erroneous core beliefs that goes with each of the genetic predispositions that the body type has.
Like archetypes.
Like archetypes, except actual structure and posture of the physical body.
Right.
So these erroneous core beliefs basically are what we believe about ourselves, the truth we hold about ourselves, but it's untrue. It's dysfunctional. For example, one of the erroneous core beliefs is there's no one here for me.
Right. I'm all by myself.
I'm all by myself. Now, when that's activated, you can have the most loving partner, the most loving parent, but you will not experience it because your filters won't allow that to come through.
You claim lay claim to one of those called "I can do it myself," huh?
That's correct. That's
Boy,
called a self-reliant body type.
boy, I am definitely there with you on that. I spent years that way. It's and what a
Oh,
job.
that's interesting, mine. I did also.
Yeah, it's just caused me no end of grief, and the people around me no end of grief.
Well, what happens when we disconnect from our true divine nature is that it's set up in such a way that an alarm system goes off. The alarm system is the feeling that something's wrong.
Right.
Now, 4 things happen when you disconnect from your divine nature. One of the things, and this is, by the way, from the Patanjali Sutras now, one of the things that happens when you disconnect from your divine nature is you immediately feel alone. Not all one, like the spelling of the word, but alone.
Right.
The second thing happens is because you have this feeling of separation, you began looking for something to feel better, and we call that desire. And we know that as distractions. We start running, looking for love in all the wrong places.
Absolutely.
Now, the third thing that happens is now you have this feeling of being separate and alone. You start having a desire for something to feel better. I need to be in a relationship. I know if I had a partner, I'd feel good. So you start desiring love. Now, where does that desire originate from? A place inside of you that isn't feeling love.
The mother of addiction.
Yes, the mother of addiction. Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
third thing that happens then is when you're feeling this separation, you start blaming things for being the cause of the separation. This feeling inside that something's wrong, you believe it's because I don't have enough money, or, again, I don't have a partner, or you said something and I didn't like it, and that's why I feel badly. So that's called aversion.
Right.
Then the fourth thing happens, and we see this in our society right now, and my heart goes out to all those people who are frightened, because the fourth thing that happens is you're not feeling secure, you're not feeling taken care of, you're not feeling like you control your destiny, and what happens is you start feeling very frightened. Those 4 attributes were discussed thousands of years ago as the characteristics of the human mind, what the mind experiences when it's no longer connected to its divine, immortal nature.
Well, Gary, what's interesting to me when we look at these kinds of wisdoms is that we think that we're so smart because we're technologically advanced, and that they were somehow or other, less than. But boy, to have known all of that back in those early stages was very, very powerful, and tells me they had to have been connected with some kind of a wisdom source to come to
There's a wisdom
understand.
source for sure.
Yeah.
There's amazing things that have come from these ancient cultures. I mean, even in our own traditions, look at our First Nations peoples. Look at their understanding of the relationship to Mother Earth. Look at their understanding of how we should act to each other on the planet. We can be so inspired to rethink the things we've been taught just by looking at these ancient cultures.
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, you teach a class that called, I believe you call it, Learn the Practical and Relevant Truths About How to Live Successfully in the World. Am I right?
That's correct, yes.
I would really like to focus on that concept tonight, Gary, because I think that, that whole idea is really important and something that our viewers can take to the bank, can take home with them and be able to use.
Well, that leads us to the conversation, and I appreciate that you're tracking that so well, because our book, the one book that we just mentioned, that's just a memoir. But our real important book is the one we're doing called Enlightening Moments. What my wife and I have done is taken these ancient teachings and not teach it as yoga and not go into the Sanskrit and all of these ancient sutras, because it takes a long time to learn that.
Absolutely.
So
Dedication.
So what
to
we did was we put them into a series of relationship tools that can be learned by anyone, but they have the essence of these ancient teachings in it. So we are now traveling Canada and the U.S., teaching our enlightening moments, relationship tools to people, which is what the book is about. And what these tools are is how to deal with the mind when we get upset. There needed to be, we believe, because we've been working with people all these years, that these teachings are good, but they're not relevant.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I'm getting upset with you because you're leading the interview in a way and I don't want it to be that way, and I'm getting upset, I have to be able to recognize I'm upset and realize that something's activated inside of me, and I have to be able to deactivate the upsetness. I have to have a method to get back into balance. So we designed a 5-step process that can deactivate the most upsetting emotional imbalance in 5 easy steps. Takes a lot of practice, no doubt about that.
Okay, well, tell me, your wife has just really made you angry, and you're in the reactionary mode, just reacting. What do you do?
Okay, step 1. I recognize that I'm getting agitated. I'm getting agitated.
Right.
What happens to most people is they're getting upset, but they don't realize that they're actually getting upset.
Well, let me stop you for just a moment there. That's really key. Most people don't even realize that that's what's happening, and they start seeing that they're right, and they start amping it up. At what point do you have to bring somebody before they can even want to use your tool?
Well, the first thing we do is we kind of hook them in because we talk about how people right now are very frustrated with their life.
Hugely so, yes.
Yeah, frustration is out there. So what we did, one of our tools is exiting the frustration cycle.
Uh-huh.
So here's how we teach that. And that's a very good question, by the way, because, you're tracking it perfectly. Once you're frustrated, why do people think they're frustrated? Let's use the example of, your partner gets you upset. So you think you're upset because of something the partner said, right?
Right.
So the first thing what we do is train people to see, okay, what's the situation? My wife said, did you follow through on that phone call that you told me you were going to do? Now, when she says that, something gets activated inside of me and I get upset. And so in getting upset, I don't recognize it. So I think that the reason I'm upset is because my wife just questioned me.
Right.
My story is my wife is criticizing me. That's my story. So the first step is when you're upset is separate your story from the situation. You got to see where those are two different things. Remember Dragnet where they talked about the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Just give me the facts.
Mr. Jack Webb.
Yeah, Mr. Jack Webb, you remember.
Absolutely.
All right, so when we're upset, what we have to do is realize what is the situation and what's my story about that situation. Now, in doing that, what you're going to find is you're at a crossroads. You either take responsibility for being upset or you're going to blame the situation for the cause of your upsetness.
Certainly, and blame is pretty entrenched in our rationalization, is it not?
Well, yes, unfortunately, because if you stay with blame, you have to make the situation, in this case, my wife, wrong.
Right.
And that doesn't feel good.
Feels lousy for both people.
It feels lousy. So then what happens next is, instead of exiting the frustration cycle, I'm feeling badly. Maybe I even convince my wife she is wrong, right? I'm that kind of strong personality.
I'm sure.
My wife's a loving person. She says, listen, okay, I'm not going to fight with you. All right, I did it. I'm sorry. I apologize. But it still doesn't feel good.
Right. And somewhere
So
deep.
the next thing that people have to do, because they're not really taking responsibility, is they have to distract. They have to find a distraction. Now you've got your addictions.
Right.
Now you go to the fridge and you get something to eat. You turn on the TV. You hug your wife and you have sex. You have a drink. You go out and have a drug. you do something to cover over this yucky feeling inside.
Because somewhere inside you know the truth.
Because somewhere inside you know the truth. Now, this distraction does nothing to transform your relationship with this feeling that's inside of you. The situation was the catalyst for this emotional upset. The situation was not the cause. Now, when someone realizes that, that's a huge shift. So that's how we train people in our workshops. We train people to begin to realize that when they're upset, they're usually going to blame the situation. Nothing ever gets resolved. And so they have to then make themselves feel better somehow. And my goodness, look at our world. Our world, especially here in the United States, is based on distraction.
Absolutely. And come to this realization that nobody is responsible for upsetting me, that I'm the one who upsets me.
That's correct.
That's very hard to come to, and it's
Well, you
often
know what?
takes.
It is hard to come to. You know, you're correct. Absolutely. However,
Yeah.
and I'm sure a lot of your listeners understand this, there are some of us who have done this long enough and we're frustrated because, as Einstein said, we're using the same old techniques expecting different results.
And also using the same mind to try and change the mind. So
Beautiful. Yeah.
that's very, if next to
Yeah.
impossible.
There's a saying, Abraham Maslow, who's a humanistic psychologist,
Yep, very familiar.
up with the hierarchy of needs.
Yep.
And when I did my psychotherapy training, I loved this one. Abraham Maslow said, the mind is like a hammer, and every problem is going to look like a nail.
And absolutely does.
You know, and you just pound away at things when you shouldn't. You know, there's a fly that's on your window, and you take a hammer, and you smash the fly. Well, good going, because you just destroyed your window. There are people who are realizing, I'm frustrated. I need another way of looking at life. They're actually tired of blaming other things for being the cause of their problem. Then they're ready for our 5 steps. Because the 5 steps are quite simple. When you get activated, you take responsibility. I'm upset. I'm upset.
Right.
The situation is the catalyst. My wife is not the cause of my upsetness. My wife and I, when we were married 34 years ago, part of our wedding vows was that we would take responsibility for our own balance.
So let me ask you, you've been married for how long? 34, 35 years, something like that?
Yeah, going on 35.
So tell me, in that 35 years, have you ever been separated?
We almost were foolish enough to get separated. And circumstances absolutely refused to put up with our ignorance. And so the answer to the question is no.
Good for you. Because I think it's staying power and a willingness to change and meet somewhere in the middle is huge in relationships.
Well, if you remember, I took vows to be a monk.
Right.
I took those vows very seriously, and it took my teacher a year to counsel me because he was the one who had to actually convince me to leave the vows.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because when I take a vow, I stay focused on it, and I follow through on it.
Come hell or
So
high
when
water,
I
right?
took those vows to get married, now that doesn't mean we haven't had rocky times, as I'm sure you can well imagine.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Yes. You know, we definitely had unconscious moments in our life. However, we did stay with it. That's how we came up with our relationship tools. And now we've reached that romantic stage of the relationship again where we just can't get enough of each other. It's so wonderful. But that comes through hard work.
I watched my sister, who was married, 40 years, and her husband died here just about a couple of years ago.
That's tough.
It's very tough. And I watched her go through periods, Gary, where she just dearly loved him, and her romance was high, to times where she hated him and stayed. Very, very powerful.
Yeah.
So
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, so once you take responsibility for your upsetness,
Uh-huh.
all right, the next step after that is start recognizing the patterns when you get upset. This is a really powerful step. When each of us get upset, we have a pattern. It's a pattern of avoidance, but it's a pattern of trying to deal with the upsetness. For example, everyone knows their comfort food,
Right.
right? Eggplant parmesan, that's my comfort food.
And usually have it fairly close at hand.
Yeah, well, yes. So if I can't get that, a chocolate chip cookie will do also.
Just one?
But there's definite patterns.
Right.
So the second step to our process, the first one is getting activated and taking responsibility for it. The second is an R, recognizing the patterns. Now, as soon as you recognize the patterns, that's where you can really, really see, wow, this really is about something going on inside of me. As soon as you do that, you get curious. My work, when I'm counseling, coaching people, is to get them curious about their addictions, get them curious about their dysfunction, not judge it, not try to get rid of it, but to make friends with it.
Boy, you got to put your arm around it if you're ever going to be able to get it straightened out.
Well, any of us who've been around a long time and have had some success in it have come to that realization, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it does no good to try to get rid of it. And all the therapies that all you do is talk about it, or all you do is try to change your behavior, you're not making friends with it.
It's like trying to wrestle an alligator in quicksand.
Yes. Well, in the ancient Vedas, you know how they describe it? They said, imagine trying to deal with a monkey. And a monkey jumps around a lot, but not just a monkey. Then they say, try to imagine dealing with a monkey who has just had a gallon of wine.
Oh, wow.
Okay, that's not enough. Then it goes on to say, imagine trying to deal with a monkey that just had a gallon of wine and has just been stung by a scorpion. Yeah, you're right. There's no way you're going to win that fight.
No, it can't happen. It can't happen.
Well, the truth is that what we're really trying to get rid of is something that's inside of us, something that's hurting.
Absolutely.
Something that needs love, that needs compassion, that needs understanding. I see it like a little child inside of me. You know, I get petulant or I get out of balance, my blood sugar shifts, and all of a sudden I'm finding fault with my wife. Well, our deal with each other is, as soon as I point the finger at my wife, she smiles at me and says, so what's going on inside, hon?
Well, you're right. It's absolutely childlike, isn't it?
Yeah.
Childish.
Sure is.
Not childlike, childish. There's a huge...
Yeah, childish.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these tools, these tools that we've been sharing with people, they're simple, but they're relevant. We need some tools right now to assist people in taking responsibility for their upsets, because we live in a world where everyone's blaming everyone else.
Everyone. Yeah, as a matter of fact, if we were watching tonight's State of the Union,
State of the Union address,
we'd sure be seeing it there. So as I understand it, Gary, you have some classes you're doing in Delray in February?
Yes. Yeah, we're very fortunate. We live in Vancouver. We've moved to Vancouver.
Uh-huh.
And we come down here. We have contracts with, I teach in the senior country clubs, so that's part of my work. I love working with the seniors.
Right.
I've done that for 20 years. I love it so much I became a senior.
Boy, I'll tell you what, it didn't take long for us either, did it?
No, it didn't. It comes fast, actually, doesn't it?
Oh, boy, yeah.
And I love every second. But we also teach the meditation series on a Tuesday evening. That's where I was before this interview.
Uh-huh.
And we offer once a month meditation days where we get together with a group of people and we teach them these techniques and these tools.
Tom is going to put your website where they can find the schedule up on our chat room for you.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very nice.
Hey, by the way, Gary, when you actually publish the books, contact me, because we'll sell them through our website for you.
Well, that is very, very generous, and I would love to send it to you, and I'd love for you to read it and give me feedback on what you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it's going to be wonderful. I'll look forward to that. So I have a lot of things I'd like to talk about with you tonight. We're not even going to come close to, but there's one I think is important, and it's a struggle I believe that most people who end up spiritual but not religious, or end up in some Eastern philosophy from coming from a Western background must struggle with. And that is, you suggest that you have somehow or other integrated your Catholic upbringing with your yogi beliefs.
That's correct.
How have you been able to do that? What has been what is your trick for that? I mean, how do you get past the idea that Jesus was the only Son of God? How do you get past that to where you actually are able to integrate your Catholic upbringing?
Well, it's a big question, and obviously it's been 40 years in the making, but I think I can give you a short answer to it. I believe that there are many, many paths
Absolutely.
to the same destination. And given the temperament, and given the personality, and given the cultural background, there are different paths that seem to fit different people. However, it was always impossible for me to believe that there was only one way of thinking, that there was only one diet, that there was only one job or one profession. When I look around the world, what I realized was that there are so many possibilities and options that it would seem ludicrous if I said to you that everyone across the board should eat the diet that I think is best.
Right.
I mean, everyone would say, no, don't be silly. You know, everyone's different. They live in different climates, and they have different body types, and they have different allergies. So, you know, what works for you doesn't work for me. So they would have no problem saying that. I know that.
Right.
So for me, it was so easy to see that there is truth in everything that's great. So when I started studying yoga, which comes from the Vedas, what I realized was, all the stories were very similar.
Yes.
Very similar. It's actually quite interesting that the traditions that I learned in Catholicism, which is 2,000 years old, but I began to see that, my goodness, look at this. They've using the same traditions as yogis were using 10,000 years ago.
Right.
There must be a universal truth. There must be something common to all of them. So when I was in college, I went to a Jesuit college because I was destined to be a priest. I was the oldest son in a Roman Catholic family. I had 20 cousins. I was the oldest boy. So I was going to be the priest. So I went to a Jesuit college, St. Peter's College in Jersey City, New Jersey.
Uh-huh.
And in studying my religion, Catholicism, I also studied Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Jainism. So I started looking into other religions, and the Jesuits are very open that way. And in doing so, I realized we have a lot of many common points in all the different religions. That attracted me. For some reason, I don't have the temperament that says, I have the way, and it's the only way. It never made sense to me as a person.
I don't either. Were you ever exposed to the the contemplative meditation? Or, I'm sorry, contemplative prayer?
I studied, one of my favorite authors, and I'll say teacher, although I never met him, was Thomas Merton.
Merton was wonderful, wasn't he? I got several of first editions with Merton. Merton was.
Oh yes, no, he was very influential, and to me, all of the great teachers are yogis because I don't use the word as a cultural word. I use the word yoga to mean that which creates unity and brings cooperation and harmony to first my physical body, second my mind, then to my family, and then to the planet where I am inhabiting.
And that was Merton's real core message, was that,
It was, yes.
Unification. So tell me, if you were able to pick 5 minutes out of your life that you'd love to live over, what would they be? What happened?
The day I took my sannyas initiation, the day that I got married, the time when I had an experience that allowed me to realize that this material world is temporary and that there is a place that's eternal and that never changes, and that is a perfect place. Let's see, that's 3, right?
Well, actually, I must have phrased the question. I'm just any 5 minutes of your life. So you more
5 minutes?
you more than answered it. Your first one probably would have been the
Yeah.
first one. Listen, we've only got I guess about 3 or 4 minutes left here, and I'd like for you, if I missed anything that you would like to take the next couple 3 minutes and talk about, please do. If not,
Well,
I
I
have.
think what I would like to say is, first, thank you.
Thank
To have
you.
a show like you have on is very important. To showcase people who are doing these practices, and you encapsulate that. You know, your life reflects exactly what it is that you're teaching and what you're sharing, and also the people you invite on. So I'd like to say I am just honored to be on the show and to have an opportunity to talk and to share with you, and to have more people be interested in this kind of conversation. I believe that the world is so much better a place when all of us have an opportunity to be heard, to share what we believe, and to have people to actually be interested in listening to us. So you're doing an absolutely wonderful, wonderful thing, and I'm so happy that I had an opportunity to share and to be with you.
Thank you. I'll tell you what, Gary. At some point, we're going to be contacting you to see if you're interested. You and Jeffrey might be interested in doing a show on our network.
I would be honored to do that. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, we'll
our planet, as you know, because you do know this, and the work you're doing is helping to heal it, that our planet just needs all of the loving people out there. It needs some way just to listen, to talk together, to have a conversation and a discussion. We need to change things.
And Gary, I'll tell you what, we have needed all of the struggle, all of the difficulties, and all of the pain that's going on now to bring enough people together to make that tipping point, to bring that change about. And I think we're really close into that point. It's been going on for a while. And hopefully we'll, Gary, I don't think that, if we have that transformation, I don't think it will be so noticeable to us. Kind of like the Renaissance wasn't noticeable. There's no real point of departure that you can point to.
Yeah.
And but I'm blessed to be able to be a part of all that.
Well, and you do it very well, because you don't do it through any type of judgment. You do it in such a way that you invite people to share who they are, and you do a good work at that. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And listen, be sure and tell Jeffrey how much I enjoyed having him on the show. And I'm
going to call him right now, and as a matter of fact, he might be listening right now because he knew that I was speaking.
Great. And at some point, we'll have you back. You get down here on the the west coast of Florida. We'll contact me. We'll have a cup of coffee.
All right. Well, sure, we'll do that.
Okay, Gary. Have a good night. Thanks very much for spending your time with me tonight.
My pleasure, and thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Good guy, Tom. I just totally enjoyed my conversation with Gary tonight. I hope that a lot of our viewers got some real benefit from what he had to say. I'll tell you what, I have an idea that his workshop would be super beneficial. So if you're out there, and you got some stress or some struggle going on in your life, was it GaryBello.com?
It was. I've got it up now.
Well, at any rate,
it's on our site.
It's on our site in the chat room. Get into that course. Get into one of Gary's classes. So be sure and come back next week. We've got Deb Kruger. You're going to have a good time. We'll have a good time with Deb. Next week, same time, 9 p.m., Tuesday evening, Eastern Standard Time, See you then. In the meantime, don't forget to accentuate the positive and have a fantastic week.
Audio's off. And the broadcast is done.
Cool.
Good show.
That one felt good.
Yeah. No, he was very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting and willing to get down there
We got
with me.
somebody in our chat room who said, "Great show."
We actually have
we
someone
went
in there.
from 3 people watching to 53 over the course
Oh, cool.
of the last, I'd say 20, 25 minutes.
Oh, cool. I have a hunch that show is going to get a lot of play.
You know what I did? I posted our link with his name. I just put Yogi Gopal Gary Bello
Yeah.
on the Facebook yoga site that has 39,000
Oh, great idea.
people. And we've been members of it since we started with Mastering the Life.
Right.
So I think that what I'll do is I'll go back in and tell them that you're going to have the replay up.
As a matter of fact, I'll put that up and put